To me, educational liberation means that regardless of who you are, you come into your educational learning space, you feel empowered, you feel validated, you feel seen, you feel represented, right? And you feel like you can take risks. I think the biggest thing with school, which is kind of ironic, is folks are afraid to fail, which to me is sharing that folks are afraid to learn,
Mhm.
right? Because they don't feel safe to do so. And in my research, I don't talk about safety, I talk about safeness. Because as a global majority person, I believe that safety takes many, many forms, right? I'm not just talking physical safety, psychological safety. So that safeness is really fluid for us in the building, for all folks in a building, right? Or any space. But I think that when we feel safe, right, to engage and to take risks, that to me is educational liberation.
Welcome to Purposeful Empathy, a show that's dedicated to amplifying the voices of people from across the globe who understand that the world needs more empathy and are doing something about it. This season is devoted to the power of empathy in education. Meet 12 visionary leaders from the Transformative Educational Leadership Fellowship Program and learn how they are bringing meaningful change to their schools. You won't want to miss a single episode, so hit the subscribe button now. Thanks for watching. Enjoy the show. Welcome to a new episode of Purposeful Empathy. Today I'm joined by Jasmine Locke, a school support specialist and teacher on special assignment at Westview High School in the Beaverton School District. She's also a Transformative Educational Leadership Fellow. Born and raised in Portland, Oregon, Jasmine's personal, academic, and professional journey has always been rooted in service to her community and a commitment to collective justice. She is currently pursuing her doctorate in educational leadership at Lewis and Clark College, where her research focuses on racial affinity and racial literacy as tools for educational liberation. In her free
Mm.
time, she loves to travel, spend time in nature, read, and listen to music. She's also embracing self care and watercoloring as a new creative routine. This season, I am exploring the power of empathy in education, and I've invited Jasmine to be a guest because that's precisely what she practices and exemplifies. Welcome to the show, Jasmine.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. Thank you so much for having me, Anita. I'm so happy to be here.
Well, there's so much to talk about. And I like starting these conversations because we've just gotten to know you through a bio, but maybe there's
Mhm.
other things that you might want to share with listeners or viewers about you that would sort of describe or explain the passions that you have in the education space.
Yes, no, thank you for the question. Thank you for asking. And the beautiful intro, truly hearing words like education and liberation, like again, that somatic release, I feel it in my body. So I know that that is like my calling. And so I think things that I would like to add additionally is that I work in the district in which I was a student. And truly to me in education, it is about being a lifelong learner. I don't refer to teachers as teachers, I refer to them as lead learners, right? Because I think owning and naming the positionality is key, especially for our students. But to remind them and let them know that we are there to learn alongside them. Truly, I learn most from my students in front of me. They are my teachers, right, or the lead learners. And so I think really a key thing when I think about my educational journey and how I've gotten to where I am today, and truly when I hear my bio, I just see little J. I see that student in the district, right? And really the through line to my work is really serving her, right? Because although I love my time in the Beaverton School District when I was a student, it was also very complicated. There was a lot of tension and times when I didn't feel empathy, right? And so I have that, always had that saying of the grass is green where you water it, right? So I wanted to come back and really tend to and nurture that community. And so I think that's something that's really powerful or speaks to still the direction and passion of my work in education.
So I don't know if I put you on the spot, and I certainly wouldn't want to ask a question that's sort of painful or re-traumatizing, but I wonder if you
Mhm.
could share an anecdote that stays with you about some time as a student, as a learner, feeling that challenge that you mentioned.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that question, truly. Thank you. Because I have a few pivotal moments that stick out to me. I think the first is in elementary school. And it was fifth grade, and it was the first time that I had been directly called the N-word at school. And so I was with my best friend, Katrina, at the time. She still vividly remembers this story. And I went to her and I said, Katrina, do you know what this means? So and so just called me. And, so we went to our friend. Do you know what this means? Do you know what this means? Went to my teachers. Do you know what this means? And in that moment, I could see my teacher pause, right? Like the panic wash over her face of like, oh, snap. I do know what that means. I don't know how to communicate to you what that means. And I knew it was bad, right? Like I knew the way that it was delivered to me, it was malicious, right? Like it was not with positive intent, wasn't intended to build community. And the way that my teacher responded was almost by not responding, right? So it was a moment where I felt like my panic wasn't valid, right? Like did that really, is this something? And so I went home and I had to take that learning home, right? And so my parents sat down and had that conversation with me around what happened, how to respond, like giving me one-liners of how to respond. But truly, that was the first time in schools where I felt like this true conflict of my identity internal versus the external, right? How I saw myself and how the world saw me. And I think at that moment, when I look back at my educational journey and why I care so passionately for racial literacy, it was because in that moment, my teacher was not equipped to lean into my racial literacy and the environment in which it needed to be leaned into, right? Because at home, I'm protected in a different sense than I am out in the real world, right? And so to have that conversation with my parents, beautiful. I'm very grateful to them. And again, has gotten me to where I am today, but I can't help but go back to that moment in fifth grade and throughout my school experience where the adults in the building didn't know how to respond and didn't know how to hold that space. And again, it's not to shame or blame them, but it was absolutely my why in chasing like no student should feel that isolation. I don't want any student to have to go to the trusted adults in that building and be met with like a, I see the panic, but I don't know how to respond, therefore I'm not going to. And so that I think having that repeated experience and truly even through my undergrad, right, where I really found like my voice in advocacy and I found the language of equity work in education, um, where that really became like clear to me, that came in alignment. But that repeated, yeah, situation and occurrence where the adults just did not have the tools or skills to lean into the racial literacy that I really needed to develop at that time to be able to protect myself in and outside of school is absolutely my why. Absolutely my why.
Thank you for sharing that story. It's very upsetting, and I appreciate your candor. And obviously, I can really understand the why from your lived experience and the work that you do. And I want to talk about the work you do, and I want to talk about the PhD. I really want to unpack. There's
Mhm.
so much to explore here. But I'm just struck by the moment in time. We're taping this in February. And everything that has anything to do with identity or inclusion or equity is under attack, at least in the
Yes.
United States, but I presume it's coming
Yes.
to Canada any moment too. How are you feeling about that?
Scared, right? Like I feel that when you talk about it, right? Like I feel the somatic release of like palm sweaty. I feel it in my chest, right? So I do feel that fear. And I lean into that and I make space for that, right? Of like the grief and the fear that comes with like, woo, history repeating itself, y'all. And again, having a background in history and ELA, right? Like I can see these patterns and that offers, you know, some grounding, some not, right? Because again, we can see this pattern. But that fear is also like mixed with my anger. And I've really learned to lean into like when my anger is showing up, my anchor question is like, well, what needs protecting? Right? And that moment, what needs protecting? And that has really helped me to dig deeper inward, right? And into my like ancestral, like the shoulders that I stand on, right? So again, with history repeating itself in horrendous and then also really beautiful ways, right? Because the revolution is here. And so when I feel that like flush of like, woo, where we are currently and the wave that is coming for our marginalized communities, again, I feel that I'm enraged by that and then channeling that rage to be action, right? Action oriented of like, what can I do within my locus of control? What can I do with my community right now to be an advocate, to educate, right? And to organize. because I know that what is living in my body is living in so many bodies, right? And so we do not address and connect with what we feel, I worry that we will, that pressure and that system will continue to run the way it's intended. Um, but our joy is resistance, right? Our existence is resistance and direct disruption to what we see with this fear and hate on the rise.
So just this last little bit where it sounds to me like you're coming at it with resistance, and there was almost
Mm,
like a minor smile of like,
mm,
pride and can-do attitude,
mm,
despite how exhausted
mhm,
educators and racialized educators in particular must feel, because there's you as a
mhm,
person, there's your colleagues that and
mhm,
the students that you love and care about. And it's the students
mhm,
all across everywhere,
mhm,
every contact.
mhm.
And
Yes.
so I think I think maybe I'll ask the question. I was going to ask it at the end, but like, what are some of the practices, your go-to places for
Mm,
self-care, so that you can nurture the resilience that's needed for the
mm, mhm. Oh, thank you for that. And I'm actually really appreciative for Tell
moment?
for my self-care, like routines and rituals. And specifically like when, yeah, I think my rituals or routines, especially when I'm feeling emotionally heightened. Um, I come back to the like tenets of nonviolence, right? So when I have to like protect myself or boundaries, right? When I think of self-care, I think of like boundaries because that's a form of self-care, right? And so coming back to that space, I really think of, I will never forget what Michael said our first day of Tell, like if it is violent to me, it is violent to my community, right? And so really reframing instances through that lens, right? Is this violent to myself? Then it is violent to my community. And part of that practice has come like through the like embodiment practice that Tell has taught me to really be present in my being, hand on my heart, right? And truly taking a pause. To me, that's been the biggest change in my self-care practice is giving myself a minute to take a breath throughout the day in a meeting before I say something, when asked a direct question, truly fighting that urgency to give myself the opportunity to get grounded in myself, be present where my feet are, because so often the system takes me out of my body, away from my feet. I'm sky high, and I gotta like reel myself back in. So it has been like such an act and gift of self-care for that pause and breath in conversation and in moments to gather myself. And that has allowed me to then trickle to bigger pauses or breaths within my day, so a lot of movement, right? Joyful movement in my day. Music is really healing to me. Um, but truly, that foundational piece that has been a huge catalyst and really transformed my self care practice is that reframing of, is this violent to myself? Because it will be violent to my community. And that has really helped me to find the things that feel caring to me and identify the things that feel uncaring to me.
Mm. And so you're sharing somatically what you're feeling. I could sense my anxiety getting all
Mm,
riled up listening to you. I
mm,
imagine some people who are listening and watching are feeling something
mm.
in their bodies, not at a sense of ease, but at a sense of tension.
Mhm.
And so maybe
Mhm.
the invitation here is for, press pause, take a couple of deep breaths, and do some
Mhm.
recentering as we continue to engage in this dialogue. It is so important that we pay attention to our
Mhm.
bodies, what they're telling
Oh
us.
yeah. It really is. And like and it's exactly what they don't want, right? It's exactly what the system doesn't want is for us to be connected. It wants power, wants us slumped in a chair, right? Docile and dumb. That's why they attack education. That's why they do, so part of that fear, right? To me is also like, okay, well, you're painting a very clear picture of the things that you're also fearful of, right? So how do we counter that, disrupt that? Um, and a huge way to do that is by taking care of ourselves.
Personal is political. I love
The
that.
personal is political. The personal is political. And when we try to disentangle, right, or when we try to argue that it is separate, we then get into like the individualistic state, right? So again, this whole idea of the human experience of non-separation, to me, that's the root of empathy, right? Is the idea that we as humans are non-separated,
Yeah.
right? If I win, you win, we all win. If
Yeah.
I lose, you lose, we all lose. Right?
Yeah.
Comes back to that. Is it violent to myself?
Yeah.
Okay.
You know, when I
Okay.
read into biomimicry, I'm a big fan of biomimicry. One of the core characteristics of a healthy, vibrant ecosystem is
Mm,
that there's diversity.
mm,
That is a core
mm, mm,
characteristic, and that
mhm.
within that ecosystem of diversity, when one element thrives, it gives an opportunity to the other elements to thrive. So wouldn't we
Love
all
this.
want that? Wouldn't we all want that for each other, for all of us to thrive?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Right. But I think it's an odd entanglement, right, of supremacy culture that it's this idea of the hierarchy, right? And maintaining hierarchy and racial hierarchy and power, right? It's wild
Okay,
what power does to disrupt empathy. Sorry, go ahead.
no, that's good. And I know we're going to dig deeper into that when we talk about
Yeah.
your doctoral research. Okay, but let me just understand what you works, what you do,
Yes.
on a day-to-day basis as a school
Yes.
support specialist. Tell me what that means.
Yes. Whew, it means many things. It means many, many things. I wear a lot of hats. I'll start with my top three favorite hats. My first hat is always being a student advocate. Student voice is very, very key to all of the work that I do. I think the second tenet that like is nested right into that is the professional development piece. I know my own research is rooted in racial literacy and really being able to tap into adult development, right? The lead learners in the space around that racial literacy development to get to our students. But a lot of our professional development that is created is done in collaboration with students. And so students come and do panels, they lead sessions, they share anecdotes and story, right? So they are a part of and in that space with us, as they should be. I believe they should be. So student advocate number one, professional development, and then academic coaching for our lead learners in the space, right? So helping to support our admin team. I'm kind of the in between, if you will, with our teachers and our admin team, which is honestly the perfect shift. I have my admin license, I've had it for a few years, not necessarily interested in admin, but twice as hard, half as much type of game. But really just to know the system, right? And to be able to ask critical questions and to be able to be at the table, knowing that it's an honor and privilege to be at that table, having those discussions with them to really be able to challenge and bring the student teacher voice to the table. So I think that is, yeah, probably one of my still learning, but one of my favorite avenues that I found in education. Yet
It seems
I
like the
really
role
enjoy
is
that
so
piece.
important because I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off there, but
No, that's okay.
I'm thinking that in a perfect world, on a perfect day, your role is really a bridge to the promised land. Like you can, yeah.
Hmm. I hope. And truly, like I say the word hope, and that's how I look at my role, right? Like I really want to be like the love, light, and hope in a building,
Mm,
right? But
mm.
like my perspective and my main like lens, anything that I'm doing in that building is like, how are we building trusted adults and how are we building connection with our students? Westview is a very big school. Last I checked, I think we were the second largest comprehensive in Oregon. Our report card last year was about 2,300 students. This year, we're a little closer to 25. And there's one in my position, right? And so it's tough when we play a numbers game, but truly like that mission is like, how do we make a school so big feel small,
Mm.
right? Like how do we make sure that everybody has a point of connection in this school community, right? That is really important to me. And so, yeah, trying to drive that work through any avenue I can in this support role of like, ooh, are we like the rudest connection? That behavior is telling me the student's not feeling connected. It is our role to figure out what is going to make you feel locked in and connected here. And it might not be here, right? But how are we connecting with the student to really find out what their goals and dreams of success are so that we can get them connected?
Can you give us an example? I'm sure you have lots of examples of something that's happened where it's been a good day at work.
Oh my gosh. Yes. I will share. Let's see. Part of my work this year, my role, I'm in the academic recovery center. So I'm working with students that are working to recover credit or have been credit deficient. And on Friday was kind of a wild day, but was able to like meet and connect with four students that all finished their credit recovery piece. So like having success right in the space and seeing them have academic confidence is always a win-win-win. Also on Friday, I had an opportunity to facilitate and be there to support a staff member with a community member and a student, and do like a little bit of a restorative meeting, which again is primarily my work. Like everything is done with justice or restorative justice as the lens. And so being able to be in that space where there is tension, right? Or there feels like conflict. I love being able to be in the space of reminding folks of like, not necessarily conflict, but an opportunity to have a conversation, right? Because to me, conflict is all rooted in miscommunication and clarity is direction. And so to be able to sit in the space to also hold adults, right? I love working with students, but I'm also really learning that I love to be able to hold adults in the space because they have never, or very rarely, I should say, been held in the space with care, with inquiry, not judgment, right? And with like expected vulnerability. I think adults oftentimes are pull them up by the bootstraps mentality, and we really have to unlearn that. And being able to witness that transformation is powerful. So I got to end my week with that on Friday, and that was amazing.
Love
It
it.
was
I love
amazing.
it. Okay, that explains the
Yes.
smile that we can do this.
Yeah. Oh, yes, we can. Yes, we can.
We must.
Uh,
So let's dig into the doctoral work, right? Tools for educational liberation. So, what does
mm.
it mean to achieve educational liberation? And tell me more about these racial affinity and racial literacy tools.
Yeah, amazing. Thank you for asking. I think tools for liberation can be defined on an individual basis. And I say that like with an asterisk, right? Because I don't want to say like it is individual. Nope, that's not what I'm saying. But I'm saying that liberation for each of us can be different, right? But to me, educational liberation means that regardless of who you are, you come into your educational learning space, you feel empowered, you feel validated, you feel seen, you feel represented, right? And you feel like you can take risks. I think the biggest thing with school, which is kind of ironic, is folks are afraid to fail, which to me is sharing that folks are afraid to learn,
Mm,
right? Because they don't feel safe to do so. And in my research, I don't talk about safety, I talk about safeness. Because as a global majority person, I believe that safety takes many, many forms, right? I'm not just talking physical safety, psychological safety. So that safeness is really fluid for us in the building, for all folks in a building, right? Or any space. But I think that when we feel safe, right, to engage and to take risks, that to me is educational liberation,
mm,
right? At its core. That is educational liberation at its core. And connecting that to the piece of racial affinity spaces, as I shared before, kind of my through line in my own schooling, right? In my own practice, is going back to and really trying to sit in space with little J, and the things that either were served or not served during that time and trying to sit in that criticality and then pairing that to see where students, that current student experience is right now and to hold them in that same space that I hold little J. And with racial affinity, there's something, and I would say, honestly, affinity in general, it doesn't have to be a racial affinity identity that's bringing us to the space. But when we have a shared identity in a space that is bringing us together, there is already something automatic about that validation and about that empowerment and about that visibility and representation. Um, it doesn't necessarily need to be said, right? It is something that is felt. It's a somatic release, right? And then when we're able to be in that space with the somatic release and then pair that to action, feeling, emotion, et cetera, what I have been able to witness and where students have grown is powerful. I was just sitting with my principal Friday, and he shared with me the stats of our Black student graduates over the last 3 years. I've been working at Westview for four now, with the BSU for the full 4 years, or the Black Student Union for the full 4 years. And 3 years ago, our graduation rate was about 68%. 2 years ago, it was at 80. Last year it was at 93 for our Black students. So when I talk about educational liberation, although I believe in qualitative research and the power of storytelling, I know that a lot of folks need numbers. Um, and the numbers can show that essence that I'm working to capture in my research of that educational liberation that is absent in predominantly white spaces and historically white institutions for our Black students or global majority students. Um, but when that is present, when that empowerment and validation and representation is present, educational liberation is also present.
Well, congratulations for playing a role in that. That's a talk about key performance indicator, wonderful. Not only kudos to you in terms of your role in the team that's, working with you, but congratulations to all those young people who are
Oh,
succeeding.
it is them, y'all. It is the
Yeah,
kids.
yeah,
It is
love
all
it.
them. It is all
Love that.
them.
Love that. What about racial literacy? What does that mean to you? Like how does that show up?
Yeah. So going back to the story that I shared at the beginning, actually, so with that first encounter of the N-word, typically the research with racial literacy talks about, and I use the seminal researcher, Dr. Howard Stevenson, amazing, 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 his book on racial literacy. I recommend. But when he talks about racial literacy and racial socialization, he does so through narrative, and he shares his own story. And a lot of racial literacy research is talking about parents racially socializing their children at home. So in that story that I shared of when I went to my teacher, what does this word mean?
Mm,
No answer. And then I go home and I have that conversation, right? So typically racial literacy is global majority parents teaching their students the cultural nuances and ways of being, speaking, living, etc. within that racial group, right? Oftentimes not done outside of the home, right? In schools or talked about outside of that space. And so for me, it's really powerful to bring racial literacy and racial socialization from the home to the schools, because one thing that I think there's a gap there, um, is if we have folks that don't have the tools to lean into that educational piece for their students, um, either at home or at school, right? And so I think it's really powerful that students can equip themselves, right? When given the space, again, I'm going to go back to those numbers aren't me, y'all. Those numbers are the kids creating that space. I tell them all the time, tell me what you need and I will get out of the way. I am there simply because I have the institutional knowledge. I'll do the transportation for them. I'll call the bus, right? Like that's the stuff I can do. Everything else is by them for them,
mm,
right? And so when we create and empower that,
mm.
right? And we as adults oftentimes are like, well, we got to have supervision, the control piece. We are able to release that and really transform racial literacy where students can equip themselves. Not only are we going to see more current iterations of racial literacy and where it's currently at for our kids, but hopefully we'll continue to see numbers that are not predictable by race in
Yes,
education.
yes, yes, yes. And I'm thinking of I've learned the neuroscience that our brain lights up the pain area of our brain if we
Mhm.
like cut our finger or if we feel slighted in some way, if we feel like
Mm,
excluded from a group. Um,
mhm,
the brain doesn't know the difference. So things like
mhm,
exclusion is painful to our psyche. And I also know that, if you show up at school and you haven't had breakfast and you're hungry, you can't study. But you also can't study if you don't feel like you are included and are being seen and heard. And so the another conversation that I had on the podcast, Al, you'll know Al, said
mm.
that the social emotional part of the student life in the school, in the classroom, in the hallways is foundational upon which
Yes.
curriculum and content is stacked. You agree?
Absolutely. Learning happens through play. Learning happens through childlike wonder, right? Learning happens through socialization. And what we have seen in our schools, right, is like more rigidity. more box, right? To check fit the student into a box, check the box. Well, here, y'all, I'm here to the box doesn't exist. There's no box, right? There is no box. Color outside the lines, right? Like I love when students, what lines? Amazing, y'all. Exactly.
Mhm.
Color, just color, right? It is foundational. It is foundational.
Yeah, and how that sort of shows up in my classrooms because you're in high school, right? So I'm
Hmm.
teaching at McGill University, and I've got students that are asking me about the font size that they should use for their essays, which I mean drives me to distraction on their behalf because they're asking because they have been conditioned
Yes.
to
Yes.
to make it through a particular avenue without a sense of agency on how they want to learn, what they want to learn
Mm,
about, how they want to be in the world. So
mm.
you get to them earlier than, sky's the limit later, right?
Yes, yes, yes. Well, and again, giving them the tools to really, like you said, know themselves. And when you know yourself as a learner, ooh, it makes it that much easier to step into that space.
And a point of clarification before we step into empathy specifically is
Yes.
racial literacy meant only for racialized students and teachers?
No, racial literacy is for everyone. So again, race is a social construct. And so when we think of, again, how we are all socialized under that construction.
Mm,
So I would say even doubly so, racial literacy is very, very important for our white allies and co-conspirators to
mm.
really be digging in to
So,
their identity, how that shows up. Sorry, go ahead.
yeah, well, so here, as Canadians, we pay a lot of attention to American politics, and it's hard to ignore.
Oh yeah, whoa,
Sizable
loud.
place in the global ecosystem. Um, there is giant pushback against learning about history.
Mm,
Um, as though the history is meant to make anybody feel guilty. I just wonder if you would respond to that.
mm. Well, my research is rooted in counter narratives. Um, yes, I'm going to come back to what I said before with like the attack on education. To me, is very clear of where their fear lies, right? Because when folks are tapped into their history or are tapped into their story, nobody can tell them otherwise. So it releases control, right? And then power becomes in the hands of many versus in the hands of few. And so, in response to that, I would just continue to encourage folks again to first hold space of inquiry for themselves before you ever hold space of inquiry outside of yourself, right? But that is to know your story and to know your history with criticality, right? And to not to look at it with shame,
Mm.
not to look at it with shame, but to look at it in terms of like, these are the shoulders that I stand on, right? And I get to choose that direction, right? I get to choose where that baton gets to be carried and passed. But in order to know who we're passing, we have got to know our history. That to me is a non-negotiable. But if our history feels too big, knowing your own is still vital.
And the shame that you speak of, or the real don't do it with shame, is
Hmm.
is so that internalized oppression doesn't take root. Is that right?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Beyond. And then again, what is internalized becomes externalized,
Mhm.
right? So again, being able to take that deep, deep dive to sit with ourselves, sit with our story, sit with our history is going to empower us and allow us to do the same with others,
Mhm.
right? And to do so with grace and high expectations and accountability. Um, but yes, it is to stop both the internalized that does become the externalized, whether folks are aware of it or not. When we do not allow ourselves to live fully as ourselves, we do the same outside of ourselves, whether we know it or not.
Yeah. Yeah. So this is a podcast about empathy and the power of empathy in education. I wonder if you could speak to the role empathy plays in your work and in your
Mm,
research.
mm, beautiful. I think, yeah, well, I think both my work and my research are very closely tied together. So truly, empathy is like at the very, very core of that work. And so, like I was saying before, of taking that moment of taking a breath and a pause, to me, education is heart work.
Mm.
It is heart work, right? For better or for worse, sometimes our hearts feel really heavy, sometimes they feel light and full, and it's amazing, but it is hard work, right? And so empathy and education are in my role, right? Is to truly meet. And again, like I said, taking breaths, we need to humanize the educational system. We have been so dehumanized. I can't tell you how often I sit down for a meeting and we jump, whoo, folks try to jump right into it. Okay, so we have da da da. Woo, okay, everybody. Can we pause? I
Mm.
would really love to hear how we are all entering the space. Where are we at today? Because again, if we are not feeling grounded in our person, if we are not feeling present here, it's going to create more work for us in the long run,
Mm.
right? So like approaching that space of meeting empathy with myself first. If I show up a few minutes late to a meeting, or if I need to take a breath in a meeting, I offer that same grace to the folks in this space. And then I think connecting that piece in regards to my research, again, at the core of counter story, I chose counter narratives for a reason, because I feel like storytelling is how we build empathy. Knowing each other's, again, knowing our own stories, how we can connect with ourselves, and then allows us to build deeper connection with others. So to me, empathy is at the core of narrative. It is at the core of connection, right? And so when I think of doing that work with my students, being an insider researcher, being of the Black community while researching with the Black community, I feel offers a deeper level of trust with my students, as well as a deeper level of empathy for them to show up and engage authentically. And again, hopefully tap into more of that educational liberation in and outside of both the research project, BSU, as well as Westview, right? For their success. But to me, empathy is how we approach our work, truly, because education is heart work. If we are not taking time to tend to our heart and the humanity in the space, or to invite the humanity back in the space, then the system's going to continue to work the way it was intended to.
Right, and the system intended to work the way it's intended to. So, what I'm
Hmm.
hearing loud and clear through our
Hmm.
conversation is that it's not a group of administrators or policymakers that are a little bit clueless about what's going on in the classroom, and they're sort of like, making it about rigorous testing, standardized testing, and all this other stuff that's going on, and changing curriculum, da 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 da. You're flatly saying it's by design to dehumanize education because that serves the powers that be.
Absolutely. I think it's a both and, right? I think that they can do those things because of our foundation, right? So my research is also rooted in plantation politic ideology. And so it talks about how schools still maintain plantation politics, right, via racial hierarchy and anti-Blackness. Um, and that's by design. When we go back to our educational system, if we dig into the history of education and where public schooling came from, right, like it is post enslavement and Reconstruction, and looking at school, like it is very intentional how they built this system. So again, when we sit with the question of like where we are currently in our socio-political context, yes, I have that fear mixed with that rage, right? Because that rage is like, y'all, we should not be surprised. And yes, I mean, at the same time, I'm happy to be surprised because I'm not normalized to supremacy culture, right? So like I will take that surprise where I can. Um, but again, to me, it's a both end, because this is very, very intentional. This is very, very intentional with how our system is built, which is also why I will never leave education. Because I'm like, oh, we will continue to disrupt in the areas that we can, because yeah, we know we know this was intentional. So we can be intentional right back.
Yes.
Hmm.
Yes, 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 yes,
Hmm.
yes. Okay, so you
Hmm.
think that empathy is foundational and key to across
Absolutely.
the educational space,
Absolutely.
foundational. Is it a buzzword now in education, or how can we ensure that it becomes a thing to really address student needs and support their growth?
Yeah, I think it's tricky. I think oftentimes, yeah, my quick answer is yes, it's become a buzzword in education as equity, as DEI, right, as CEL. We love acronyms in education. And so I do think it has become a buzzword, as things innately do in the system. Um, but a way that we can counteract that to really ensure that students are being met in empathetic educational spaces. Again, I'm going to come back to the individuals in the system. We can be in the system and not of the system, right? So when I talk about revolution, the revolution is within each of us, right? It lives within each of us. And so we have to tap into what are our empathetic practices, right? What are my empathetic practices first with myself? I also want to name like lead learners. We are in the role of holding people, right? We hold folks all day, which is exhausting. But then my question becomes, well, who holds the holders,
Mm.
right? And in order to really dig deep into our empathetic work as practitioners and lead learners in the space, we have got to figure out how we hold ourselves first with empathy, again, before we can externalize those practices. And so, in order for it to not become a buzzword, it has to be something that is embodied in the practice. It has to be something that is a discipline within the practice, and it has to be something that is a routine or ritual for the practitioner within that lead learner practice. Um,
I
yeah.
wonder, I wonder if it's true within the education space. I've done some work with a palliative care center and nurses,
Mm,
and have discovered that the highest level of empathy shows up with the patient and the patient's
mm.
family, and then maybe due to compassion fatigue or empathy fatigue, just plain old exhaustion among the nursing staff, there'll be a lot of like unkind ways of speaking and being with each other. Is that showing up in education as well?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. Compassion fatigue is real. Burnout is real, right? And that is where I say, ooh, if we are not doing that inside work to sit with ourselves with empathy, right? To really know, like, am I feeling elevated right now? Am I feeling stressed right now? And what are the things that I need to care for myself? So, therefore, I can name that outside of myself, right? What I often find is in the workplace setting is again when folks are disconnected from themselves, when they're not in alignment with themselves, right? Then everything outside of them has a slight misalignment, right? And so again, I think our knee jerk reaction, because of how we have been socially conditioned, is to externalize that or to sweep it under the rug, right? It's actually like, ooh, we need a bit of balance of both, right? We need a balance of both of that. Otherwise, we're going to continue to sustain toxic workplace, right? Environments as well as burnout
Right.
because we're not doing the work of sitting with ourselves honestly, transparently, and therefore able to show up. How powerful is it? I find it to be so powerful to be able to show up at work. Oh, y'all, I'm feeling a little out of my body. I need a breath. Is there anybody I could pass this to get this meeting rolling for me? Thank you so much. Just that simple. And it's hard. I can't tell you how many years it took to be able to do that, right? To be able to ask for that help and to name, like, ooh, I need to be kind to myself right now. And to be kind to myself is to actually ask for help because I'm feeling all out of sorts. Or I could have come into that meeting tight lipped, shut down or sat down my computer, started typing, pull up the slides, right? And just jumped right. And that is what we see because that's been the conditioned expectation is that we keep going. But there's the dehumanized nature, right? And when we're dehumanized, we are far from empathy. And in fact, we are apathetic.
Yeah.
We are apathetic. So when we humanize ourselves and when we humanize that space, we are infusing it with empathy.
Yes. And okay, so that makes me think about when kids in classrooms are extended empathy, like
Mm,
when they feel that they're seen and heard, and that empathy exists in their spaces of learning. Just like, we teach math and literacy skills, and we teach science and biology and geography, and we teach all these subjects so that they go out and they're, educated adults in the world, and then they can,
mhm.
leverage all of the skills and tools and knowledge that they have for professional careers, but also living a dignified life. I wonder what role you think, the the fact that empathy is present in a classroom, how does that prepare students to navigate the world and
Mm.
maybe even change the world?
Mm. I love that because empathy is a core ingredient for transformation. I believe that transformation of self, therefore of community, right? And so when that's present in the classroom, students are able to like, well, I don't want to speak for students, but what I've been able to witness and what's been shared with me in my experience, right, is that students are able to see themselves, right? Like I oftentimes in my practice say like mirror moments, right? I just the other day, yesterday, a student came in, Miss Locke, you doing okay? You're kind of quiet over lunch. I was like, whoa, y'all, thank you for that mirror moment. Because that was a check. I got so sucked in here. I wasn't trying to be disengaging here, right? But when we are able to hold up the mirrors for our students, for them to really see themselves, I'm going to go back to like it allows them to do the same for others, right? There, that is the domino effect, right? And so we can navigate the world with more visibility of those around us. And to me, that's more cultural awareness. To me, that's more inclusive awareness. To me, that's being able to um, predict or foresee someone's needs without them having to name it, right? So it's giving them these nuanced skills that are going to make them a strong team player. It's going to make them a strong communicator. It's going to make them a strong community member, partner, right? Like someone that's very caring and endearing and can read. Again, I think Al actually shared in our last tell meeting, he said, your conscious mind can process 40 thoughts at once, and your subconscious can process 3 million. So that means that folks can feel, right? Are not, and I've always known, right? Again, I've always known that we communicate more in nonverbals than verbal, right? Like I know that. But when Al gave me the numbers to match it, right? That to me is tapping into what we have empathetic students that turn into empathetic leaders, that turn into empathetic citizens. That creates a very transformative world and a very inclusive world, and a world that can hold criticality, a world that can hold paradox, a world that can hold discomfort and be okay, right? And still be at the table. I feel like I went off on a little bit of a tangent there, but I hope I addressed your question.
Absolutely. And then, I got flooded with emotion because I was thinking the more a student feels complete, right? And has agency, if you think about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, if they're self-actualized,
Mm,
then they want to be of service, right? So it becomes about how can I help others?
I love
And
this. And I love that you brought up Maslow's hierarchy of needs because did you know that in the indigenous communities, the hierarchy of needs was inverted?
no.
Yes. So when Maslow was studying alongside the indigenous communities, he has a Jewish background, um, their hierarchy of needs is inverted and self-actualization is at the bottom before you get to food and shelter, which is at the top. But Maslow flipped it because he said, we live in a world upside down. So you cannot expect, like, we cannot start at self-actualization in a world upside down. You've got to start with the tangible. So he flipped.
Well, that's fascinating.
This,
Can I layer onto this then? Because
yes.
research for my book just was like new content, new material that Maslow wrote that had not been formally published, was
Mm,
surfacing in the years that I was writing the book. And I discovered before he died of a heart attack poolside,
mm,
and he was writing voraciously about the upside down triangle. So the triangle actually was created by a graphic designer. It wasn't like
mm-hmm,
he didn't make the triangle, but
mm-hmm.
he started talking about self-transcendence, that at the moment of self-actualization, then it could be about service. So it came full circle.
Yeah.
That's fascinating. That's
That
fascinating.
is yes. But I've always held on to that. When I heard that in my one of my graduate classes talking about the history of education and all this, yeah, that has stuck with me. Like in a world upside down, we had to flip it. And yeah, it is empathetic leaders, right? To me, I see the inverted triangle in their practice,
Yeah, because
right?
that's how we're spiritual beings in a
Yes.
body. Right. Yes, exactly.
Hmm.
Um,
Hmm.
okay, I have a couple of more questions. I want to ask you just quickly because you're on the younger side, younger than me by a few decades, I'd say. I wonder if you could speak to the challenges of teaching empathy in a digitized digital world of social media and what role educators can play to
Yeah.
help young people despite those seriously toxic spaces.
Very toxic spaces. Yes, great question. And I say this speaking, I want to name. I do not have any social media, and that is very intentional. Um, Shortly after George Floyd, I took myself off. That was not the action nor the ways that I wanted to engage with the action-oriented community. So I think my biggest thing in teaching empathy is already technology by nature is intended to disconnect us from humanity, right? Like it is an act of dehumanizing us from other human interactions. However, I know I say that being on a Zoom, being able to connect. So I will say technology has offered us tools of connection, right? But at the core, like we see in sci-fi, throughout the sci-fi, right? Like it has been the direct counter to humanity, right? And so I think the biggest thing is everything. My mom always said everything in healthy doses, right? And I think the biggest thing that educators can do in this digitized world is to not swing too heavily to the digitized side. My district, when I first came into teaching, had just gone one to one. All of the kids got Chromebooks, right? And as an ELA teacher, I was like, what? And I'm not tech. So not only do I not have I don't have any social media, I'm not super tech savvy, right? Like I don't use a lot of tech in my teaching practice. I love the act of like physical, I love tangible things. Like I'm a hands-on learner myself. I'm visual, so I like it all in front of me. And I think the biggest thing that saved my teaching and I think truly put me on the path that I am with my students right now was not leaning into all the technology, right? Really holding true the pen to paper, pencil to paper, the conversation in person. And I know that with a larger audience, there are tech teachers out there that are like, I have done amazing, and I know you can do amazing things with technology. But I think it's also reminding folks of other ways to play, other ways to create, um, and doing so without that supplemental piece there, right? I know ChatGPT, especially in the English world,
Mm.
really my colleagues, when I was still in the English classroom, right, were freaking. And in my world, I'm like, I'm okay because like my kids are turning in essays, right? Like they turn in handwritten and we can go back to that, right? And we can use technology as a supplemental tool, right? To help enhance their voice, to help enhance their thoughts. Beyond that, it's not needed as the foundation, it's not needed as the starting point. And then I think when we use it as a starting point, now it's become a form of self-care. Folks will get on there and scroll, scroll. They'll be like, oh, I just need a brain break. And it's like, woo, I would love if we could get brain breaks of movement, brain breaks outside, brain breaks of breath, right? And so
Right.
figuring
That's
out again
of hugs.
of hugs, of physical connection, right? Truly putting the screen down and having that physical connection. And so I would just really encourage educators because I think technology also saves from a lot of unstructured time. I have found that lead learners worry about not having time to fill with and I'm like, oh, that's the best. To me, that was always the best time in class. It's like an elevated 10 and 2, y'all. We just get to be together in space. And to me, that is all learning is about. We are social beings and we learn from each other. So how do we find that balance to bring each other back into the space absent of that technology? And again, when students are able to be grounded in themselves, just getting to the social media part, then I don't feel like they can get so wrapped up in the toxicity of what they see on social media because they know what their values are, they know what they stand for, they know what their boundaries are. And it's much easier then to turn that on off switch, swipe it away, turn it off, get out of the app, etc. So I just think it's all connected. And so if we just really start to again start with ourselves and we start to model that and bring that, absolutely it's going to reach our kids.
This has been a sublime interview. I'm sad that it's coming to a close, but I have one question left.
Yeah.
Thank you for spending the hour with me and us.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
Can you think of a time in your life when you were on the receiving end of empathy and what that meant for you?
Yes. When I think about being on the receiving end of empathy, there is one story that always kind of floats to the surface. And it's when I was an undergrad at Boise State. And it was early in the semester. And we had like a little coffee shop on campus that was connected to the library. And I was just going in to study for a class. And I'd seen this woman sitting at a table, this young woman sitting at a table, and she was just hysterically crying. And so it's like, okay, my dad always taught me like the act of like paying it forward, right? And if like we see something, we say something, right? Like we always say something. We reach out and just connect like, hey, I see you and I see you're hurting, right? And you are not alone. And so I got a little cake pop, wrote a little note, and just left it on the table. I didn't say anything to her, just left it on the table and went to my class. Months later, I'm in that same coffee shop. I'm studying for a final. And when I tell you, like, my being is not okay, I am stressed, I'm not crying, but I'm very, very stressed. And about an hour and a half being there, a little treat slides onto my table, and it was from that young woman. And she wrote me a note saying, like, I don't know if you remember, you didn't know what was going on, right? But like I needed you to know that I felt that and like I needed to extend to you and the divine synchronicity of that timing, right? Was so powerful to me because it taught me like the power and contagion of empathy, right? Of like it's so easy and so often I feel like we see folks colleagues that might come in a little bit heavier, a little slump shoulder, you know, and in our mind, it's our knee jerk to be like, okay, they'll deal with it, or they'll come tell me. They'll come tell, right? They'll say, what's the harm in extending if we have the capacity to extend, right? And I think that's really the biggest thing with empathy is so often folks are scared to extend, right? Um, but it means so much, right? And it's like such a small act. It is such a small act. And that I know, yeah, it was shared or like prompted myself first and then received. But that the fact that she took it upon herself to come back and revisit that space and to share not only the impact, but to share a little bit of love and empathy with me, not knowing that I needed it in that moment, right? I think just comes back to it's really the power of being tapped into ourselves to be able to see, oh, something is off here. Do I have the capacity to check in? And then how do I extend? Right. And so that moment for me, just like really every time I see students in the hall that seem a little dysregulated or, you know, I just like, hey, can I walk with you for a second? I'd love to check in. And if they have the capacity to, you know, I always ask, this is an invitation. If you have the capacity to share, it just seems like something's off. I just need you to know that I'm here. If I'm not your trusted adult, I'm happy to connect you and bring you to that space where your trusted adult is. But I just need you to know that whew, I see you. Those are powerful words. I see you. And in that moment in that coffee shop, that was the most resonant I see you I'd ever had.
I usually ask this question and end by reminding viewers or listeners how easy it is to turn up the volume of empathy in our lives and how much of an impact it can have, even if it's a small thing. But there's nothing that I could say in addition to what you just said to make that case. So just thank you,
Oh, that's
Jasmine.
right.
Really appreciate
Thank
that.
you.
Really
Thank
appreciate that.
you. The work you do is powerful. And this platform that you have of empathy, again, divine synchronicity, the world always needs it. Always needs it. So thank you. Thank you.
Great to have you on the show, and I want to thank everybody who's been watching and listening, and we'll see you next week at Purposeful Empathy. If you know someone who would benefit from this episode, please share it with them. Post the link to your socials and hit the subscribe button now. The world needs more empathy, and you have an important role to play.